Good morning and welcome to the latest LACE webinar. I'm really delighted that you can join us today. Thank you very much for everybody that's taken the time out of their busy days whilst we are sort of still in lockdown. My name is Chris Howard. I'm the Marketing Director at LACE Partners, and this webinar today is about the reality of the return to HR. And Aaron, if you can just share the screen for us so that we can see the lovely graphic that we've got. So what we're going to do is we are going to show you just a couple of slides, but predominantly speaking, it will be, I'll introduce our guests in a second. It'll be our guests hosted by the lovely Aaron Albury, who is Managing Director and Co-founder at LACE Partners. Before we introduce the guests though, a few housekeeping bits and bobs for you guys. This is obviously the go-to platform, and what we try to do with this, as we've done with all of our previous webinars, is to encourage people to pop their questions into the chat box functionality that we've got. I'll be manning the chat box the whole time, so you can ask me a question if you like, but there should also be a question functionality, and we just need to test that that actually works. So if you can just put hello, how you doing, what your favorite color is, or something like that, that would be really helpful, so that I can see that people can use the chat functionality. I'm not seeing anything at the moment, so I'm hoping that people can use the chat functionality. Orange is the new black, somebody said. Very good. I like that. I like that. If I could just get a few more people just confirming that they can actually hear me by just confirming. There we go. We've got Alan, we've got Celine, excellent stuff. Hannah, thank you very much. Brilliant. Top stuff. Emily's joined us, Venetia, Chris, Peter, brilliant. It's all coming through now. Right, so we know that the chat functionality works, which is the first tick of the day. So the duration of the webinar, we will finish this by 10 o'clock, because I appreciate that everybody's got meetings and other things that they get on and do. We'll aim to have probably about 10 minutes of a Q&A. So about 10 to 10, we'll have a Q&A. And in between that time, it'll be Aaron, and it'll be our two speakers for the day. So Aaron, should we introduce our two speakers? So Aaron's going to take over from me for a second, just for as a quick bit of an intro. But we have Caroline Smith, who's the Chief People Officer at esure. Caroline, how are you doing? Hello. I'm very well, thanks. How are you? Not too bad, not too bad. Now, we're terribly sorry to all of you guys that have been listening in, but we've had some technical issues with the videos, Caroline's videos. So you won't get to see the fabulous esure background, branded esure background that she's got. I can assure you it is there, because I spoke to her earlier on a Teams call, and Aaron has promised to show you via his phone, or at least send round via some sort of chat functionality. Caroline's in the office at the moment. She's already started the reality of the return. And joining Caroline, we've got Ben Higgins, who's from Société Générale, and hopefully you can see Ben. So Ben, give us a wave.
Morning. Great to be here.
Morning,
Thanks
Ben.
for the invite.
Lovely to have you, lovely to have you. So enough of me waffling on. I'm not the reason you're here. The reason you're here is to hear from these two wonderful people, and from Aaron as well, our co-founder. Aaron, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure, Chris. Thanks very much. And welcome everyone today. Thanks for making the first of our morning webinars, and the fourth in our series around the dealing with the crisis of COVID. This one, we're going to move away from sort of predicting a little bit and talking in real time around what is happening during the crisis, and focus on the reality of the return to the office and to new ways of working, and focus, as we say, on some of the practical hints and tips that both Caroline and Ben will bring to life for us during the webinar. I'm sure there'll be a number of questions as we go through. Clearly, you know, this is a difficult time for not just business, but for the economy as a whole. And I think, you know, the last few months, as expected, the press and the analysts have made some depressive reading. You know, GDP fall of 20% over April. I think most people believe now that it will probably stabilize by the end of this year, somewhere between 7 and 10% drop on GDP. But of course, as Ben will talk about, I'm sure, a little bit later, we then have the lovely transition from Brexit still to come in Q1 of 2021. You know, unemployment has always been very stable for the last few years. People know, around the 4%. We're now up around 9, and there's an expectation that may well peak at around 11 or 10%. going into 2021. And if you think about the broadest sense of jobs at risk, about a quarter of the UK workforce is in some way at risk at the moment, either directly from redundancy, furlough, or from reduced pay and hours. So, clearly the focus for every business right now is about bouncing back. It's about getting back to more normal trading and moving that forward fast as possible. And those next few months that we go through are going to be really critical about how people embed back into work and how the transition back to whatever the new normal will be for your business, how that transition is run and how smoothly that is. And as we've discussed before on these webinars, the role of HR has never been more critical in helping businesses do that. This is a real people challenge and people issue to be managed. And as we've talked about before as well, the key thing here is about the criticality of maintaining positivity in the workforce, the engagement of the workforce through this transition, and ultimately the productivity of your business through this transition. And as I say, HR is really at the center of all of that. And as we enter going forward, probably the one big certainty is that there is no return to the old ways of working, and certainly we'll be seeing a hybrid way of working going forward for some period of time, and a use of offices in a different way, as we've investigated in some of our podcasts. Different ways of working in offices and uses of offices. And I'm really excited to hear from Ben and Caroline today to understand a little bit about how, for their organizations, they intend to make use of the office, but also maintain that engagement with people through the transition period. We talked in previous webinars about a 12-step plan. Some of you I know are returners to our webinar today and will be familiar with this slide. And there are 3 layers we talked about through that. And clearly we're talking a lot again about the reality of the third, the thriving, and the transition back to BAU or to the new normal. How you maintain some of that home working experience that has been very positive in your organization and how you integrate those lessons learned. But also clearly, as I was talking about, the hybrid approach, the fact that a number of your people in your organization, probably quite a large number of people in your organization, will retain home working, means that that second layer, the supporting activities, continues to be a really key focus. And how you creatively engage people, how you ensure their well-being and mental health, which I know, Ben, you will come talk about some of the things you're doing in your organization, and also how we maintain the right leadership behaviors. These are all really critical to success going forward. I'm going to switch off the slides in a second and just introduce my 2 guests, a lot who have come in for today. The slides are available for use later if people want to see copies of them, and they're on our website. But today I really have the privilege of being joined by two good friends and HR leaders in Caroline and Ben. And their businesses are really at the forefront, and their roles and their businesses are at the forefront of their return and the recovery. And so for the next sort of 35, 40 minutes or so, I'm going to ask a couple of questions and let Caroline and Ben talk about their experiences. And as you heard from Chris there at the start, Caroline is the CPO of esure, and Ben, you're the UK HR Director for Société Générale, but also, I believe, the Chairman of the City HR as well, which I'm sure you'll talk a little bit about, sort of your understanding of experience from listening to other members of HR in the city as well as we go through this. Caroline, we've known each other for a number of years. I won't share how many, but our audience don't know you quite so well as I do. Can you just explain a little bit about kind of your role in esure and the context for the people listening?
Yes, no, I can do. And thank you for not declaring quite how long we've known each other. That's very kind of you. And it's quite good because you can't see how old I am either. So that's also to my advantage. So I'm the Chief People Officer for esure. I actually joined only at the beginning of this year. So I had about 5 weeks, I think, before I started doing COVID work. So not probably the start to the organisation I was expecting, but it has been a real accelerated way to understand our business in huge detail, as you can imagine. I've joined because we are embarking on a really exciting digital transformation of this business. The business was actually founded 20 years ago by Sir Peter Wood, a real innovator and disruptor, particularly in the insurance market. The organisation was bought by Bain, so we're now under private equity ownership, and that happened at the end of 2018. And what we're really looking to do is to transform what is a brilliant foundational organisation into a real digital play. So I guess the way we would describe it is to be a kind of more scaled insurtech or fintech in the insurance market.
Excellent. Thanks, Caroline. And as you say, a real baptism of fire and joining and just starting in that role right at the start of the COVID crisis. In terms of Ben, we've not known you for quite so long, only a couple of years, but I know you've had a couple of interesting years. In those years I've known you, you've been leading Brexit transition for your organisation, and now with the COVID. You want to explain a little bit about your role and the context within Société Générale?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, a thank you to my youngest daughter, because I've nicked her laptop to enable me to do this call today, because my corporate firewall won't let GoToWebinar through. So she's currently not at school, and it's Daddy's fault. So my role is I head up HR for SocGen in the UK and Ireland, which comprises broadly the investment bank, which is our largest business by scale, but also our private bank, and then we have a small asset management subsidiary as well. We have around 3,500 staff spread across our UK, Channel Islands and Gibraltar offices. As you quite rightly say, Aaron, we've been dealing with huge amounts of transformation ever since 2016 when Brexit was announced. So we're used to that context of transformation and change. This one is clearly one which is very, very different, but also, as a lot of people have remarked, it's very easy to go into the crisis comparatively to coming out of the crisis, and that's why I think this webinar today will be particularly valuable.
Excellent, thanks, Ben. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about sort of that sustained level of change and another period of sustained change that your organisation is going through, how we sustain that. So we'll come on to that, I'm sure. I think let's start then with the office. I think that's probably the best thing. One of the biggest changes since we last did this webinar is the fact that lockdown is easing and we're going back into some usage of the office. And when I say the office, I mean the physical entity rather than the Ricky Gervais show. So, Caroline, I'm really interested. We had a little chat prior to this, and you were sharing some of the sort of practical challenges of getting an office environment to work for an organisation. I think for the people listening, it'd be great just to describe how that returning into the office is working for you.
Yeah, of course. So just I guess a little bit of background. So we have three offices. We are only in the UK, which at the start I thought was going to make it very easy, but then each individual country has had a completely different approach, so hasn't been quite as straightforward as possibly it could have been. So we have an office in Glasgow, an office in Manchester, and then an office in Reigate. The Glasgow and Manchester offices are predominantly contact centre colleagues. So when at the very start of this, our real focus was to take 1,400 colleagues who were set up to work as contact centre employees in an office, and in 3 weeks we switched that and flipped that into being virtual. So it was a huge piece of work for us to do, and I'm really proud of how successful that was. And that has, kind of meant that we have set up people to work kind of however they best could manage at home. And if you think about the kind of workforce that we have, a lot of these people will be, some are still working, living at home, and some are living in shared accommodations. So they don't have a lot of space to set up their working environment. And they've been absolute stars, absolute troopers in making this work and continuing to serve our customers brilliantly throughout this period. But a bunch of them really are getting to the point where it's really difficult to keep working. So have been asking for some time, could they return to the office? So our approach has been a couple of things. We've also got some capacity constraints of everybody being able to work at home serving customers concurrently. So we've approached it very much for individuals who really voluntarily want to come back, and also where we need to add capacity to continue to best service our customers. And so this is our third week of returning people back into Glasgow and Manchester. The Reigate office, our head office, is not open because we feel that most of our colleagues in the head office can continue to work very successfully at home. So what we've done, the offices in Glasgow and Manchester look completely different to how we left them. So we actually were involved in setting the contact centre requirements for return to work for the UK because of the role that we play and because of some of the skills that we've got within our organisation. So we have kind of fully embraced all of the requirements. So we've got all the social distancing. We've stripped out loads of desks. So there's really wide walkways. We've got one-way systems in place. My facilities team is very creative. We've got traffic lights system in place to use the toilets so that there is only one person in at a time. And we've changed out things like door handles so you don't touch them with your fingers, you use your arm. And we've got, we're very lucky that our stairwells enable us to have ups and downs so nobody passes each other on the stairs. We also did a couple of things that I think really play to what I think really the big issue here is building trust with our colleagues that it's safe to come back. So we actually did 2 separate health and safety assessments, so got external input and validation of those. They were really helpful. They brought up a few things we could change or we had missed, so we addressed those before colleagues came back to work, and we've published those. And then, interestingly, one of the things that we did that really helped all of our colleagues was we created a very, very detailed handbook on all the changes that we had made and the new way of using our office, because it's completely different to how people left it. And then we've brought everybody back in very small groups of 20 to 25. And the first day that everybody comes back, we do some work before they get into the office. But the first thing everybody does is a full induction of how to use the office and answers all the questions that people have around feeling safe within the office. The feedback has been brilliant. So we've been doing surveys every week. In fact, we started doing it every day. We're now doing it every week as we build up the numbers in the office. We're still scoring out of 10. We're still scoring between 9s and 10s. We actually just did a little video to show people how very different it looks in the office. And we got some of the people who'd come back just to talk about how they felt. Really, really positive. And one of the big things I've taken away from it is just people need that social connection. They've so missed working with their teams. And even though they are still, and in our case, they're still 2 meters apart, actually, that's made a big difference to feel close to their teams, their communities, their tribes. It has been just a real positive experience for them to come back in. The one thing I would say that is really concerning people, continues to concern people though, is public transport. That's harder obviously for us to influence. We're trying to influence it through our contacts, so with the Mayor of Manchester, etc. But it's something we continue just to see if there's anything that we can do to help that. But certainly everything that we've done so far has got very positive feedback. We just need to watch that as we scale it. That continues to be that positive, and that's our big kind of watch in the coming weeks. But kind of so far so good, and I'm delighted that we have followed the asks of our colleagues. So this is really all around people needing and desiring to be back in the office.
Excellent. Thanks, Caroline. We're going to come back and ask you some follow-up questions, if that's all right. Sounds like a real experience getting everyone back in. The public transport's a really interesting one. I know that I think, Ben, when we talked before, that was one of the challenges, particularly given for your London office. Do you want to just share, Ben, your experience of bringing everything back, and then we'll just pick up some questions that are coming through.
Yeah, absolutely. So slightly different to esure is that we are a large global organization. So we roughly have 140,000 employees around the world, of which we've got around 3,500, as I said, in the UK. And of those, actually, we moved into a brand new building in October last year. So around 80% of our staff are in a brand new build in Canary Wharf, which is high tech and so on. So clearly, that was, we've got that brand new setup for all of our staff, which we've had to adjust very, very quickly. So since lockdown, we've had only 3% of our staff remain in the office. Obviously, we've followed the normal sort of health and safety considerations there, and really the main reason for keeping that 3% in is purely because their roles feature high levels of operational risk, and therefore being at home is just not something that we're willing to take that risk on behalf of our clients and on behalf of the market. And if I just take forward to what we're doing now, on the 15th of June, so just over a week ago now, we launched our return to office strategy. And one thing that I've been calling a few people out on is there's been a lot of discussion about return to work. That really gets on my goat, to be very candid, because people have been working, and I experienced this myself, very, very hard from home. Yeah. So we've been very clear this is the return to office strategy. And we have 3 waves. And the way we've done that, again, is focusing on operational risk. So people in wave 1, which is roughly, I would say, just under 10%, are people whose roles are disadvantaged from an operational risk perspective or a client connectivity basis. So traders is a good example from working from home. And the key here is that we are not asking those people to come back. We're not mandating them to come back. We're inviting them. And we've been very clear from the beginning that that employee engagement is just so crucial to us, that we've been inviting those people back in. We've not stipulated how many days a week that they should come in, and we've trained managers very carefully to transmit those messages to colleagues that they're inviting in, so that we make sure that there is consistency amongst our manager base, that they're sending the right messages to staff about. And coming back to the point that Caroline just mentioned about trust, I think it's really important here for an organisation to really have that trust between the management and the staff. And then coming on to sort of the practicalities of this, we've created a branding campaign which is called People First, Client Driven. So everywhere in the building where we've got signage, so for example, from when you're entering the building and having your temperature checked, to moving into the lifts, to where you stand in the lifts, to how you move around the building. And again, a lot of consistency that I can hear with esure here is that we've done one-way traffic around the building. Careful how many doors are closed versus open, all the sort of things around masks and so on. And I think a final point for me is that what's a big, an important facet for me that I think firms need to think about is staff expectations versus reality. And I know, for example, I know of people who say, I want to get back to the office to reconnect with people that I haven't seen for a while because I'm isolated at home. And I can understand that. But at the same time, we are actively not encouraging people to connect with each other. We are deliberately closing any areas where they can sit down and have a coffee together, because we really, the safety, security of our employees is paramount. And I think that's one thing that we have to sort of recognise. And I actually went back to the office myself last week just to experience what it was like. And the fact that you have to wear your masks everywhere you're going, apart from at your desk, the fact that desks are now so much more separated, it's not quite as convivial as it was. And I think that's an important facet we all need to remember.
Thanks, Dan. I think that's an excellent summary. And I think that answers one of our panel questions, actually, that's just come in, which was around, shouldn't people be staying at home wherever possible? And I think you've answered that for your business. I know, Caroline, you mentioned in your description there that you were asking for volunteers to come in. And again, it's around that sort of criticality for business that's driving the need to bring people back. Is that right?
Yeah, so I happen to be in the Reigate office today, but there's nobody else here. So we've got a sort of skeleton crew in here just to keep the office running, and so I come in occasionally just to make sure that they're okay. We absolutely are continuing to follow the government advice, which is to work from home where you can. We just need to recognise, I've got a bunch of people who might be working, sitting on a vanity stool on a dressing table, and that's the only space that they've been able to make available to themselves. That is not a sustainable home working solution by any means. And we have obviously put in where we can. We've put in, we've bought people desks and chairs, but actually for some people.
I think we may have lost Caroline.
I think that's probably the fire alarm which has gone off.
My apologies. As I said, I'm in the office, so that was the fire alarm. Apologies, I didn't quite catch that before you all got full blast of it. So we are continuing to where we can, absolutely, to have people working from home. We and we've kind of set the expectation that we don't expect to open the head office this year. We'll continue to review that, but that's how we are. But we do have a need to bring people back because we haven't got the kind of capacity that we need to be able to from home, and some people are just don't have the space to continue to do this, and therefore are kind of asking to come back. But we will not by any means fill up the buildings, and it is as Ben said, it is where people are comfortable, and we had quite a long list actually of people who'd been saying, please, could you open it? We really, really need to come back.
Excellent, thanks. And I'm really intrigued by both of you mentioning this point about the trust element, because I think in previous discussions we've talked about one of the biggest challenges of this transition back has been the fear factor. People have been isolated for a long time, and therefore the fear of coming back is really tangible, I think, for people. And it's really interesting to see that both of you are tackling that pretty head on by giving those videos, those examples. I think, Ben, in a previous conversation, you mentioned about postcards or something along those lines you were doing as well.
Yes, so I think you're absolutely right. The fear factor is really important to consider, and I think for me it's not just for those people who are isolated, but it's also those people who, for example, have childcare responsibilities, doing the homeschooling, maybe they've got elder care responsibilities, and there it's that fear factor as what's my manager going to think, that for portions of the normal working day I simply cannot get to calls that you want me to make, work is going to be naturally delayed and so on. And I think one thing that we've very much encouraged from the onset of this is transparency, and having transparency between employees and their managers, and really making sure that those conversations are taking place, so that people can say, look, I simply cannot work between X and Y because I've got I'm looking after the kids and so on. And again, what we're not saying is we're expecting you to catch up on that time out of hours. We're saying that the day can be flexed according to what you want. But again, something I've been particularly clear about is we also need you to look after your mental health. So we're not expecting you to use every hour of every day to work or do something. We fully recognise that people are not going to do their contractual hours. Coming back to your postcard point, Aaron, I think one thing I've really valued during this, and it's taught me a very valuable sort of lesson, is the importance between the connectivity between HR, communications, if your organisation has a sort of communications team, and of course corporate real estate. And for me, what we've done is 3 times a week we send out what we call postcard communications. So on a Monday we have Mindful Monday, we have Wellbeing Wednesday and Feel Good Friday, and we simply have a mail shot to all employees, which is is an email communication, but it takes, I guess, less than 10 seconds to take in the main messages, and then if you're interested, then you go into that and you can get more information. And really, it's to keep people, on track every other sort of working day with different tools that are available to them, different ideas, and it may be about exercise, it may be about restating the company's ethos around trust, or taking a break from work, or simple practical things about how you should be sitting at your desk, anything like that, really to just give some help to our employees and recognizing that this is difficult for all of us.
Thanks, Ben. And I think it's a really good segue to a couple of other points as well, because you talked there about the use of that sort of technology. You also talked about surveys. I know, Caroline, surveys have been important for you. I'm interested, just a couple of things in terms of facilities technology, temperature checks, etc. Have either of you embraced those? And also, what other kind of technologies are you embracing to support this? I think, Caroline, you've talked about survey tools that you've been using, for example.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of things that we've done that have been kind of technology enabled. So we are using the temperature checking. So we've put them into the entranceways to the offices that we're reopening. We've also to create as much flexibility, just going on to the point that Ben was making around the challenges of trying to juggle either caring responsibilities, homeschooling, which obviously has been an absolute joy. We have used technology so that our colleagues can be much more flexible on the shifts that they work in our contact centres. So, basically they can figure out just completely different schedules than they would have done before, which allows them to work around homeschooling, but also to work around often what is two individuals trying to work as well in one household. So we've enabled that through technology as well. And one of the other things that we've also used, which is relatively simple, is we've embraced using Zoom, and we've been delivering yoga classes, Pilates classes, HIIT sessions, pub quizzes. We've been doing cooking classes. You kind of name it. We've delivered it through kind of virtual technologies, and that's really been there to try to keep our community is pretty strong. We've got a very strong kind of family community feel, and so that was a way to keep that going. The other thing that, and in fact, it was something that I actually at the start of COVID decided that I was going to delay it until. Hilariously now, until everything got back to normal, how naive I was at the start of the year. And that was to put in a survey tool for our colleagues, because we didn't have anything. It really, very quickly became apparent I needed a way to understand how every single individual was feeling, because of course I've now got people working in 2,000 different locations, and I can't rely on getting the pulse check. So we actually spun up really quickly a new survey tool. We used a tool called Peakon. And it is just a very flexible survey tool, and it has some base templates in it. And what we spun up was the COVID survey. It's only 12 questions. We've been running it every 2 weeks, and what that means is I can see for every individual how they are doing. And the questions are very targeted, and they're very much around: are you adapting to the new working conditions? Are you managing to? How are you managing with your mental well-being? Is your manager supporting you? Does your manager understand the impact of COVID on your life? So really, really helpful comments. And we've been watching how they have been changing since the beginning. But what it's been really great at is we've also used it to target people who've really been struggling. So it just gets immediately to the challenge areas very, very quickly. We just, in the last couple of weeks, have added a new question about: are people comfortable about a phased return to work? And it both measures the average score, but it also measures the NPS for each one of the questions. We're scoring really, really high, above 8 for everything, apart from comfortable about a phased return to work, which is about 6.6. And on the NPS, which, bear in mind, goes from -100 to 100, for everything else, we've got really good 60, 70 NPS scores, which are incredibly strong. This one is our lowest at -11. And that's because we've got a huge spread of people who really want to come back, and then others who really don't. But the survey has just been fundamental to shape all the planning that we've been doing, both around helping people to cope with the situation, but also our return to office plans, because we can actually target individual by individual, and that's helped us then build up almost teams that we can bring into the office, and ones we should leave at home.
No, excellent, Carol. I know that data-driven HR is a topic that everyone wants to talk about, but this is in reality, right? This is making it really happen. Ben, what about yourself? In your organisation, the technology approach, how has that shaped up?
So it's an interesting one, because actually we've had to turn off some technologies. So when we moved into our new building, we have an approach which is that we have no allocated desks to anyone, and we have a QR code on the corner of every desk And you come in the morning, you take a photo of it with your iPhone or whatever phone you've got, and that becomes your desk for the day. So we've got a very high technology office, and now we've had to turn all of that off and have allocated desks. So for us, investing in technology, unfortunately, we've had to obviously adjust that. But two things strike me, one of which, and actually both of which are exactly what Caroline said, so I won't go into too much detail, but we're doing the temperature checking as well, and we debated this long and hard. And the main reason we're doing it is because as much as you can put one-way paths in place, and you can insist that people wear their masks around the building, the reality is that at some point you're going to get people who slip up and forget to put a mask on or go the wrong route around the building. And the feedback that we had through our pulse surveys was that people would feel more secure knowing that there's no one in the building with a temperature higher than our cutoff, which I think from memory is 37.8. And I think people felt that level of comfort knowing that no one is exhibiting a core symptom of COVID. So on the temperature checking, that's a key one for us. And again, it links to the second point, which is on the survey. So we ran pulse surveys from very early on, actually. I would say we started them a couple of weeks after lockdown formally started. And in a way, we had an advantage that because our headquarters is in Paris and they were experiencing the lockdown 2-3 weeks before us, we were able to piggyback on the back of what they were doing. So for us, that was an advantage. And again, that has fed not only how we've managed the office, but it's also fed into how we communicate with our employees and where are the concerns amongst our colleagues that we need to address from a sort of top-down exco approach as to setting the tone from the top, which I think is just so important. And I think the final element I'd mention on that is that I've seen, and I've fed into this very strongly, a big change from corporate type communications to very authentic human, human to human communication in the way that we are transmitting those messages. And I think that's, and we've had a lot of great feedback about that, people seeing sort of EQ over IQ, and I'm a firm believer that makes a real difference.
Excellent. No, I think that you're right, that communication element has been key, hasn't it? And it has certainly seemed in a lot of organizations to have changed tone. One of the questions I know that people ask at the moment is, so you're back, you've got some people back into the office, you've got the temperature checking in, you've got your new technologies in and so on to help with rostering and positioning. What happens if someone starts to show symptoms at work? How are you both dealing with that? I know, Caroline, I think at one point when we were discussing this, you talked about bubbles, creating bubbles of teams. The pre this, there was team A and team B kind of things going on. Just interested, how as an HR function are you handling someone who then starts showing symptoms?
Yeah, that's right. So we've got, so I know people are using lots of different terms. I know my son went back to school this week. They're in pods. We're using bubbles. So what we have done is similar to what Ben talked about. So we previously would have had complete hot desking in our contact centres. So you come in the morning and we would fill up as a snake. So you would start at the furthest desk and come all the way through. As you can imagine, we don't have that approach anymore. So there's no more hot desking. Each colleague that has come back to work has a dedicated desk, so they never change that desk. We've spaced out the desks so that there's kind of, fire breaks between them as well. So we've got the spacing in place, and we have got them into much smaller groups, so much smaller bubbles. A lot of what we focused on was, particularly as part of the induction, was really individuals checking in their own health themselves, because the reality is everybody knows how they feel, whether they are feeling slightly off or not, much better than anybody else does. And so we've continued to reinforce the message that if you are feeling at all well, just don't come into the office. So we've continued the ability for all of our colleagues to be able to work from home as well. So they actually can do either at the moment. So if they are not feeling well, we have very strongly advised them not to come in. And that is playing out. I think people are still very, very vigilant. I think it's how we keep that going as, restrictions continue to be relaxed, more shops, businesses start to open. I think the focus could easily drop off a bit. So we've got lots of things. And, as you can imagine, there's signs everywhere, or our team leaders are checking in constantly. There's a lot of visual cues to kind of think about it. We've also then we also had to then do lots of work to retrain our first aiders. So our first aiders have got protocols as to how they would deal with it when somebody gets ill. So they've got PPE should they need to help somebody, and they've got very clear instructions on what they're unable to do now. We've also got the temperature checking in the office. So if somebody begins to feel ill, they can check their temperature whenever they need to. And then we're very clear around what happens. So if somebody was to become ill, we're very clear that they would go home. Obviously now it's much easier to be tested. So people would go immediately to be tested, and we would immediately isolate the bubble. So self-isolate the bubble in which they are working, but we can then have them work from home. So there's still kind of a continuity. Now, what I would say is that is going to work for the moment, because even if we fill the buildings up, we'll only have a third of the capacity we had previously. So it's easy to manage for the moment. I think it will be different, if restrictions continue to be reduced, and as we go back to having full capacity. I think it needs a bit more careful thinking, because it's harder to separate people into these bubbles, obviously, as you start to fill up your buildings.
Excellent, thanks, Caroline. Ben, anything you'd add to that?
I think you've covered an awful lot of what I was going to sort of add myself, Caroline. So I think really I would probably take a different approach to this the question and look at mental health. Because mental health has been a topic we've invested a huge amount in over the last few years. But what I recognise at around the start of this is that if you take the spectrum of mental health from reactive to proactive, we've been very good at the reactive side of this. So when there is a problem identified, or we can see something coming, we've got we've got the mental health first aiders, we've got support that we've got available on our HR intranet sites. There's plenty of information, and we've got all the occupational health and doctors and so on. On the reactive side, we're doing really well, but on the proactive side, we needed to invest more in that. And I think this for us has been one of the few silver linings to this this crisis, is that we've been able to accelerate some of our work into mental health. So in fact, we just launched last week a partnership with an app called Unmind. And the main reason here is that we're looking to really get our employees to start proactively managing their mental health before we have to go back down that spectrum to the reactive stuff of dealing with a problem that people have got. And I think the reason, obviously, why we've accelerated this is because we know that some people are feeling isolated. We know that it's not necessarily the isolation in every case. It could be that people are feeling that they've got other responsibilities of elder care or child care, and frankly things are getting a little bit too much, and therefore they need to have a bit of support, and whether that's mindfulness, whether it's CBT, whatever sort of neuroscience is behind this. So and we as I said, we launched it last week. I think we've almost had 10% take up in the first week. And we know that the average for Unmind, and there are other solutions out there, but for Unmind the average is around 15% in the first month. So we already feel we're on track for a sort of good level of take up on that.
It's a fascinating area around mental health. I agree, and I think that it's great to see that switch to the proactive engagement around it, as you say. And I think talking to others, I know that has definitely been one of the considerations people are doing. I think it's a good segue for us to talk a little bit about that sustaining of engagement. And I know, Ben, you talked when you were describing your response at SocGen that you focused a lot on line managers and line manager communication. I know, Caroline, that's something that you've been doing as well. I'm really interested to understand that level of engagement that you're trying to sustain, and any additional training and education you're giving your line managers through this to allow them to deal more effectively with what is in effect a fractured workforce spread across various sites and working from home. I don't know which of you'd like to go first.
I think one of the interesting things around the engagement that I think, and I try really hard to see the opportunities and everything, and whilst obviously there's been, we've been operating in a crisis and it's been a very difficult time, I think we also need to there's some things that come out of it that we want to keep, because it's made a real positive difference to our colleagues. And one of the interesting things I think is, as we've all been communicating from home, I think it's brought a huge amount of it's made leaders just seem very human. As there's a crisis at home, or you've got to go and answer the door, or your child comes in and asks you some kind of homeschooling question, or just kind of a bunch of things which clearly you would never really see. And so we've been doing, as I think all organizations have been doing, we were doing weekly calls with our senior team. We've actually just recently moved that to fortnightly. We wrote, the executive team wrote very personal and honest blogs about how we were each coping, very personal about our struggles, our ups or downs, the things that we were proud of, the things that we were worried about. And I think that just gave everybody an insight. We're a relatively new team, so many of us joined at the beginning of the year. So it was also an opportunity just for people to get to know us, I guess in kind of an accelerated way. And we will continue to do all those kinds of things. We as I said, we're a smaller organisation. It's much easier for us to bring together large portions of our organisation to have calls with. Our team leaders have been fantastic, so they also do the same things. They communicate. One of the things that's worked really, really well is that the team leaders just have WhatsApp groups with their teams, and it's been a way to share not only business questions, but also to continue that kind of sense of community. And there's just been such a lot of creativity, around what people have hosted. It's been really brilliant to hear people. So many of our teams have been setting up a team meeting, and then right at the very beginning, when there was much more restrictions, they've all just got on a call and gone off for an hour walk and just chatted to each other about not work. So kind of really targeting the mental health aspect of it. So I think there's a bunch of those things that we will continue to do. But I think and I can see it from the scores that we get through the Peakon surveys, is that people feel really close to their managers, but also really close to the leadership. And so there's a lot of things we've learned in there that will continue. And I think the tone of the communications and I guess the informal and sort of immediate response to it is something that we will keep. And actually, what we've all figured out is that we don't need, we can just light it up ourselves. We can all now use Teams brilliantly and Zoom brilliantly. So actually, we can just do it. It doesn't need a huge amount of planning.
Right, that's fantastic. Thanks, Caroline. And I think in terms of the celebrating of that successes, as you say, and just kind of getting sharing people being more human, it is one of the big positive outputs, I think, around this crisis. And there are very few silver linings, but I think this is definitely one of those, alongside the mental health side. We have a lot of questions coming in. I hope we've been trying to answer these as we go through. We are down to the final sort of 8 minutes, so we're going to cover off a couple more just now and just work through those. But clearly, we won't cover everything. We will, as we always do a write-up at the end of this and come back to you. It's interesting. I think a couple of the questions focused on what things were like for you both before the crisis around flex working, and what was your approach before this, and has it now forever changed? Ben, I know you've talked a little bit about some of this. It'd be great to hear from yourself.
Yeah, we've done an enormous amount on flexible working. So in a nutshell, we actually introduced a new strategy to coincide with us moving into our new building because of all the technology that we were able to use. So in a nutshell, what we did is we moved away from a policy, and the policy document was a very wordy 14-page document, which basically said that people can work from home 1 day a week if they tick lots and lots of boxes and they do lots of self-assessments. And we basically moved away from all that, and we moved to a guideline which was based on a social contract. And the social contract for us is, does working from home work for your clients? Does it work for your manager? Does it work for your teams? And does it work for you? Because that's a question we need to ask ourselves. And we did training that I was the sort of face of the training as the sponsor of this initiative to every single manager, and we did Q&As. They were hugely popular to make sure that because it only requires a handful of managers to slip up on this for it not to be a success. So in fact, for us, flexible working will continue in the same vein. What we will now see, however, are those departments that were sort of hesitating about this, where they've said, no, it's not a part of our profession to work from home very often, or those that said the technology isn't there, which was true at the time, and obviously that's been accelerated. So what I do see, frankly, is greater take-up of the strategy that we already have in place on this one, and I very much see that people will have a much higher regularity of working from home. I think managers have showed that it works, and I think there again, those teams that haven't done it before have now seen the advantages to the normal areas of work-life balance and so on, and I think that will again take off even more. So we're fortunate that we started it and we'll continue it, but I think it will the pace will increase.
Excellent, thanks, Ben. And Caroline, for yourselves, was it the same case? Were you heading that way anyway?
So esure is a very different organisation. So if I tell you that when I was being interviewed, I was still being interviewed by people wearing three-piece suits, it will give you a slight insight into kind of how the organisation has kind of been run previously. So one of the things that we did really early on when our new CEO came in was that we changed our dress code to I think what is pretty commonplace to say dress for your day. And our approach to work is going to follow something relatively similar, which is you kind of need to figure out what works for you, for your team, and for the organisation that allows you to best manage between the priorities and the needs that you have from a home point of view, but also from an office point of view. And it hasn't been like that previously. So prior to this, it really was much more of a office-based 9 to 5 organisation. So we are, whilst at the moment our solution works absolutely for the situation that we find ourselves in, we are investing more on how can we put in place sustainable solutions for home working. And what we're trying to do at the moment is just really reflect on how people feel now and create and just understand what the kind of different categorizations that we have, from full-time permanent home working, which we really don't have very much of at the moment, to, I guess, this blend, which is what we expect more. So some time in the office, some time at home. And I think as I kind of look at the reports around particularly mental health, they seem to suggest that full-time office is not ideal, full-time home is not ideal, but a bit of both is actually the absolute optimum. So we will invest in shifting both the technology, but I think we've got more to do in shifting mindset. Given the history and given kind of how the organisation was before. But this has been a fantastic learning experience for everybody around what will work for them, and what we need to then reflect it into is what do we need for technology, but also actually on office space. So I think the requirements of it will be different. It will most likely be less around the kind of constructs we've got, but more around spaces for people to come together and collaborate and get work done, rather than just kind of come in and work individually.
Excellent. Thanks, Caroline. We're getting to the top of the hour. I think you'll all agree that there has been some very fascinating conversations between Caroline and Ben, and some great case studies. It remains for me to say a big thank you to both of you for your contributions today. Thank you very much. I know, Chris, you just want to have a little bit of a close out, if that's all right. But before we do, are there any takeaways, Ben, you would want to leave people with? Maybe the last 2 or 3 things they should leave with?
I think the takeaways for me, and again, I'm focusing here on the silver linings, and I'm recognizing that there are, the crisis itself is there's a few of them around, but I'm just going to focus on those. I think for me, and I've already mentioned it, but it's that linkage to corporate communication. So again, I know that not every firm has that sort of department, but that real use of authentic human-to-human contact on communications is just so key, and moving away from that sort of corporate line that often we're used to. I think the second is really getting managers to employ their emotional intelligence. And I think we try to eke that out, but I think in this sort of situation, getting employees to be transparent from the beginning, to engender that trust between employees and managers, you need to call upon that EQ of our managers. And I think that's something that we as HR owe it to sort of help them on that journey. And finally, it's, and we all know it, the technology we've been able to implement the technology, whether that be software or hardware, extremely quickly. And it's really keeping going with that. And whilst I don't personally see an enormous change to the way we work, I don't think it's going to be, change of 180. I think we owe it to our staff, we owe it to people with, elder care, childcare, etc., and interests outside of work to keep going with that.
Excellent, thanks, Ben. And Caroline, if I ask you for your three, are they similar to Ben's, or do you have some others you'd like to add?
So they're probably similar. I think one thing I would just stress the really importance is that the decisions and the actions that we have all taken and continue to take through this will last for a massive amount of time. So the way that we have treated and accommodated our colleagues, whether it's been positive experience or a negative experience, will last for a very long time in people's memories. So I continue to kind of press our executive team and the board around making sure that all the decisions that we were making were not short-term ones. And I continue to say that is really, really important to me. I think the other thing that you have to just reflect on is we have all been operating in kind of emergency as part of this crisis. And what we all have to do is to try to notch ourselves down a little bit. And I listened to a really good speech last week, and it was kind of saying there's three levels, three psychological phases that we're going through. Most of us have been in emergency. So number one, it's then quite typical to go into what they called regression, which is really the future is feeling a bit uncertain. And we've lost a bit of that crisis sense of purpose. And so you need to actively help yourself, but also the teams around you, to move out of that and into what they call recovery, which is then really around resetting your goals, reorientating yourself and revising the purpose, but also possibly the goals. And I think you have to do that really consciously, and also try to get out of a bit of, I guess, a sprint, which we've been in for quite a while. We need to both look after ourselves, but also the organisation, and move out of high alert and start to go more into, clearly we have to be very vigilant because we're likely to see another cycle of this. But for our own well-being and the well-being of our organisation, I think actively thinking around notching those down is going to be really important as well.
Yes,
thank you, Caroline.
Caroline, Ben, thank you very much. This is the end of our session today. It has been recorded, so if you go to lacepartners.co.uk/webinars, probably by Friday it will be up, and maybe up tomorrow as well. Then we'll have the recording of it if you'd like to re-listen to some of this. I'm very conscious there's been some questions as well that we haven't been able to answer. As Aaron mentioned, we do have an FAQs document that we will produce. That normally takes a little bit more time getting that typed out and stuff, so that'll probably be available next week. But I just wanted to thank you, Aaron, as well for hosting, but certainly Ben and Caroline, thanks for being part of this today.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, and we will like to see you all next time. We'll be running one of these probably later on in July, even on a different topic. But thanks very much, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you, everyone.